Welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. I'm Stacy Schmidt. Thanks for joining us. Perhaps the numbers say it all, 2020. This is a year like none other, and it just keeps coming. There's a lot to talk about today, so let me bring in our analysts, and I'll change our view here so all of you can see who we're talking about. First, joining us is former Republican Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. He has also served as a state attorney general and U.S. attorney for Western District of Pennsylvania. Governor Corbett now teaches law at Duquesne University. On the other side of the table is former chairman of the State Democratic Party in Pennsylvania, Jim Byrne. Jim also served as chairman of the Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millvale. Jim is an attorney here in Pittsburgh. Going back across the table, the Republican side, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith's background is strong in politics, dating back to the Reagan campaign of 1980. Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith was also an advisor to Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith right now has his own consulting firm in the Pittsburgh area. And going back to the Democratic side of the table is Amanda Green Hawkins. Amanda served as a national committee woman representing Pennsylvania to the Democratic National Party. Amanda also served on Allegheny County Council and is currently an attorney for a major union that's based here in Pittsburgh. And now we turn to the great philosopher of Around the Table, Joe Mystic. Joe, as a name, of course, is familiar in politics across the state, especially Democratic politics. Joe had served several roles in the city government from Pittsburgh, also served as deputy mayor for the city. Joe teaches law now at Duquesne University, and you can read his weekly column on politics and life in the Trib. So I want to thank all of you for joining us once again on Around the Table. Hope your week's been good. Speaking of what's going on this week, it appears that Amy Coney Barrett will become the next Supreme Court justice. Hearings were a lot less contentious than they were for Brett Kavanaugh. The Democrats say it is wrong to put her on the bench right now. Republicans say it is their duty to do this. So your thoughts on how things have proceeded so far? Can we really know how she's going to rule on the court? So let's start with one of our legal guys, who's an attorney, and that would be you, Amanda.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
Well, the thing is, when it comes to these judicial nominations, people want to know, is this justice going to be fair? And when we have a president who's saying he's only going to nominate people who are only going to rule in certain ways and people who can help him with this election, it raises real concerns about their ability to be fair. Now, granted, the judge may be able to do her job with all fairness and with all integrity. However, this is certainly hanging over her head. And when something like this is hanging over your head about your ability to be fair, it causes questions not only about you and your character, but it starts to chip away at this system that we have in our government. And when that starts to happen, people have no faith in it, no trust in it, and then you have just chaos. So I'm really concerned about what's hanging over her head. I do not know the judge. I'm sure that she has been a fine judge where she has been, but being a nominee under this president and his seemingly qualifications and requirements, I think it's a bad idea.
All right, Amanda, thank you for your thoughts. Governor, do you have the same concerns Amanda has?
No. And I'm sure Amanda knew that I was going to say no. You have to look at the process, and in the process is the president appoints, and every president appoints somebody who they believe is going to rule the way they think they should rule. Well, we've seen multiple examples across history where once the person got in there, they didn't rule that way. And one of the aspects of it is they're there for life. They don't pay attention to anybody outside. And Chief Justice Roberts is a prime example in recent times. He has gone against what conservatives thought that he was going to do when he went on the bench, and did exactly what he thought he would do. I think that Judge Barrett has demonstrated in her answers, patient answers to the questions, that she will reflect upon everything and rule in what she thinks is the correct way. Not what's appropriate to either party, but what is the correct way. And I think that's what we're looking for in a judge to become a justice.
Joe Mystic, your thoughts?
Well, I think she did a good job. She did what she was supposed to do. She said absolutely nothing, betrayed none of her true beliefs. left us all scratching our heads and talking about things as we are today, trying to figure out how she's going to rule. That's the nature of the process. You know, I agree with the governor that you never know how someone will ultimately turn out once they're on the court. One of the great examples of that is Dwight Eisenhower's appointment of William Brennan. He appointed a Roman Catholic before the 1956 election, thinking that this might be a good move politically, as well as place a judge or a justice on the Supreme Court who would be right of center. He was sorely disappointed. He called it one of the biggest mistakes of his administration when Justice Brennan ended up leading the liberal wing of the Warren Court. So you don't know how these will turn out. I have my own feelings here about this nominee, but we won't know till she gets there, because she didn't betray much to us during the hearings.
Keith, Joe brings out kind of a good point, and that is that justices are nominated by a particular party, a particular president, and they don't always come out to rule the way that party or president thinks they're going to. How do you think this is going to turn out?
Well, she has not given us much of a preview, as all of my previous friends have indicated. This is pretty much standard operating procedures based on all the nomination hearings that I have watched in the last 40 years. So it's pretty much the way things go during the nominating process, and we're going to have to wait and see for the first 3 or 4 years on the court where she ends up settling, whether it's left, right, or middle. I would suggest it will probably be middle or to the right. But quite frankly, the process right now this is not the drama. The drama is the next process. We have now realized that our founders, in my opinion, erred when they decided that Congress can decide whether to enlarge a court. And I know that's been debated in the last month since this vacancy has occurred. And quite frankly, that disturbs me. And not only disturbs me because a future Democratic Congress would have the ability, if they didn't like the composition of the court, to enlarge it. I will put the same onus on my own party. If they do that, then 2 years later or 4 years later, when they control Congress, they'll enlarge it again, and we'll go down a road which is very perilous for the American people and for the judicial system. So that's a real concern of mine. But a shout out to the judge. She's been a consummate professional. She sat there without notes. She's been pleasant throughout, very professional. I don't think anyone, as my previous speakers have outlined, that questions her credentials. And she didn't give us a preview, but nobody does.
Nobody does. All right, Jim Byrne, do you have the same fears that Keith has?
Yes. Let me back up to the first part of the conversation, then follow up on the second part with Keith's concerns about the size of the courts. Keith, she didn't need any notes because she didn't say anything. And she didn't have to. We all knew that. We knew when Donald Trump forced this conversation within a month of an election, when millions of Americans had already begun to cast ballots, that he didn't care about that. This narrative that, we're charged with doing this until the next election. Well, by those who say that, by their own admission, we are in the middle. We are in the middle of that next election. November 3rd, they said, come out and vote on November 3rd. That's the last day that you can vote. So America's in transition right now, and we don't know what the result is, and therefore this should have been held. The chairman in me sees another opportunity here for Joe Biden to drive his numbers even further up than they already are by showing Americans unequivocally by the actions of the GOP and Donald Trump that they would rather push party ideology with an attempt to put a conservative jurist on the highest court in the land and put that in front of the line of unemployment, put that in front of the line of a stimulus bill, pull the stimulus bill and not even have a conversation about it until we get this done first. So they've put politics, in my opinion, over the needs of the Americans. And I think that is a significant contributing factor in what is driving voters heavy towards Joe Biden, even in areas that we wouldn't even have thought would have been in play as recently as 8 months ago. The second part of the question, very quickly, what does this do to the courts moving forward? It is in the Constitution. I do not think it's a good idea, but the GOP's attempts to have a political conversation with this nominee and inject politics into the process has created a likely consequence of a conversation of expanding the courts. It is the unfortunate reality of what happens when you inject politics into a situation like this.
Yeah, you know, the Constitution is not a buffet table. You don't get to pick this piece and like ignore that other piece. You take the whole thing. And our Constitution allows the president to make a nomination, to nominate someone for the Supreme Court, even though there's an election coming in a couple of weeks. I have no problems with that. And our Constitution also allows Congress, with the approval of a sitting president, to expand or contract the size of the Supreme Court. Now, that's happened 9 times in our history. Most of the time, it was done by Republicans. Around the Civil War, it was done very surgically to give advantage to Lincoln, to deny certain flexibility to Andrew Johnson after the assassination of President Lincoln, and then to give some more flexibility to President U.S. Grant. So that's the way our Constitution works. Either take the whole thing or you don't. I know this is the age of hypocrisy, but you know, our Constitution is a wonderful document. We can change it if we want to, but no one's changed any of these things yet.
I don't doubt the fact that it's happened 9 times, but it hasn't happened since the 1800s, not in anybody's lifetime. And it would be a significant, be a significant decision to thrust upon the American people. And I believe there would be consequences. Going back quickly to Jim's point about political consequences, you always have to look at political consequences, what this means. He sees that this could be an advantage somewhat for Mr. Biden. I absolutely believe the opposite is true. I believe that there is empirical evidence that 10 to 20 million evangelicals sat on the sideline in 2016 because they did not have a comfort zone with either Hillary Clinton or candidate Donald Trump. 4 years later, because of his prowess in the judiciary, I think those voters are coming back to the polls, and it's accentuated by the recent hearings and their understanding of how important it is to have a sitting Republican president who shares their values.
I have to interject in this conversation about the courts and what they should look like, particularly the Supreme Court, and whether it should be expanded. For me, many of the rights that I, as a woman and as a Black person in America, have come because of judges. The fairness that has been sought by my predecessors has come many times from judges. And so when we're talking about a Supreme Court limited to 9 perspectives for life, and we spent a lot of time talking about Joe Biden and he'll be 82 trying to seek re-election. Well, we can have justices sitting there at 82, 85, making decisions about people several generations younger. I think it's important to have different perspectives at the table when we're talking about decisions being made for 350 million people. And if it's questionable as to whether or not that can be done with the 9 lifetime perspectives we have there, we may need to look at expanding it to add additional perspectives and point of views to that conversation. It's too important.
We're limiting the number of years they can serve.
I'm sorry?
We're limiting the number of years they can serve, as we do here in Pennsylvania.
And the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Okay, until when?
That's a good
Well, in
question.
Pennsylvania, it's 75 years old.
Well,
Right.
and I will tell you, that was changed 4 years ago, and it went from 70 to 75. And I think there's going to be some studying about how did that affect? Was 70 the right time? Is 75 the right time? We're an aging generation, but we're healthier and everything. But when you start losing some of your sharpness, that maybe you shouldn't be serving in positions like that. And you're right. An 80-year-old, 85-year-old could be just as sharp as a tack, or sharper than somebody in their 60s, or vice versa. So it really is somewhat nebulous. So there's one amendment. There's another amendment, and it goes back to what Stacy said, and that is the Supreme Court or the Congress back in the 1787 did not decide the number. Wisely, I think, because they didn't know what this country was going to grow into. They said it shall be, shall be left to the Congress. Well, I think now the Congress can say we can go with a constitutional amendment, one sentence that says the Supreme Court shall be comprised of 9 justices. There is an effort. I'm part of that effort with a number of bipartisan Republican and Democrat former AGs and governors that believe that constitutional amendment should at least be discussed right now. And it's not going to be discussed right now, but next year it's going to be discussed.
Well, let's go back to what Keith said. It was changed to 9 in 1868, I believe, 67, 1868. A lot of time has passed since then. Perhaps if you're seeking a constitutional amendment, Governor, you might want to seek one that expands the court to 11 or 15. The country's a lot bigger than it was in 1868. There's a lot more justice that needs to be dealt than there was in 1868. And it might be better to have a larger court than a smaller one.
And I would not disagree with that.
You have to allow a look back over time. And I'm not completely against what you're saying, Joe. I mean, because as far as I'm concerned, my firm ran the effort to raise the age in Pennsylvania, was successfully moved from 70 to 75. And I fundamentally believe that was correct because the age of 70 was set 50 years ago. And 50
some
years
of us
ago,
on this panel believe in our hearts
the average age of people living
the greater age is better, right?
Over 50 years. So I believe that 75 is a much fairer number, and I think people can serve dutifully until that age. To that end, I will not take off the table, at least in my own opinion, of putting an age on the Supreme Court. I don't have a problem if we would talk about a career having to end at 75 or even 80 years old. That a person would have to stand on after that age. I'd welcome that conversation.
Well, we're still not without some remedy if someone happens to begin to slip before they reach the mandatory retirement age. There are other ways that the court can address the removal of judges who are no longer able to dispense justice.
It rarely happens.
It does rarely happen. It does rarely happen.
I don't
can
recall
happen.
ever seeing that happen.
I like the fact that you think that Governor Corbett has a few good years left in him.
But let me just add this, Joe. I don't disagree with you if you're going to do it, but don't call it court packing through Congress. If you want to expand it, let's put a number on it. Let's make it a constitutional amendment and let the people of the United States decide whether that constitutional amendment.
I agree with that. But we have to recognize that the people of the United States have decided, and it's in our Constitution now, and that Congress now has that power. Just as the president has a power to make a late term appointment or nomination with an election coming up. So I think maybe you should go for both amendments, Governor.
All right, if we can, let's move on to the politics of the presidential race. Last week, the Commission on Presidential Debates canceled the debate that was scheduled for tonight. Instead, we now have dueling town halls. President Trump will be on NBC, Joe Biden on ABC at the same time tonight. So should the debates have been canceled, since the president has indeed been tested as negative for having the coronavirus now, and is canceling this debate really a service to the American people? Anybody?
I don't want to be in that room with him.
No,
I don't want to be in that room. I mean,
all right, let me back up, Joe. Let me add. So that means you would not want to be in a room with anybody who's had the virus.
Not within a time period where the CDC advises us that we should stay clear of it, and that's where we are now. He's still in a contagious period according to the CDC. We're supposed to steer clear of folks.
Dr. Fauci is signed off
right at this point in time.
No, Fauci didn't say he's clear. Fauci didn't say he's negative. Right. Fauci said he's non-contagious. He's not negative yet. He still has it. But by that statement, that is implicit. That is implicit that he still has that virus. Currently not contagious. We're seeing reoccurrences of the virus now in people who had it and then were negative. It came back. He's not negative yet. He's just allegedly not contagious. So no, I wouldn't want to be within a mile of him. Actually, to digress, I wouldn't want to be within a mile of him even if he didn't have it. but that's another matter.
Well,
And
but regardless of whether he has it or doesn't have it, I look at the question: do we need another debate? I think I said it at the end of our session last week. After we saw what was going on, we've seen the vice president candidates debate. Is somebody really going to sit down? Is there going to be any new information? The only thing that happens in a debate is somebody hopes to get a killer shot in, or they get killed with a shot. And frankly, my time, if they have those two town halls, I'm not going to watch those tonight. I have other things to do. I can go back in this day and age of technology and go look for what the important highlights were, according to the media that was filming it.
Stacy.
I agree with the governor here, but I was thinking that Joe Biden should show up for the debate himself and just have all of the airtime if his opponent didn't show up.
The commission didn't give him that chance.
I'm sorry?
The commission did not give him that chance.
Too bad, but it would have been a great opportunity to have to redo the first debate with all the airtime that he wanted. But oh well.
We're in the 15th round. We are in the 15th round of a prize fight. The governor's right. I mean, somebody's looking for a KO here. The only thing going on, going back into a debate ring in a 15th round scenario, the scorecards are pretty much, the points are where they are. There aren't that many more points yet to get. Most undecideds have now pivoted one way or the other. You're looking for a knockout. One side or the other is looking for a haymaker on a debate. Other than that, I don't see any value in it at this point either. The candidates and the campaigns need to be out there flushing votes and getting them to the polls, not watching television for 2 hours for two men to yell at each other and demean the process. That's how I see it.
All right, let me bring this up since we're talking about the debates here. There's a Wall Street Journal NBC poll that was released yesterday. It shows that the former Vice President Joe Biden, is up by 11 points, 53 to 42. The previous month, right after the debate, he was up 14 points. But here's the interesting part. I'm going to quote from the Wall Street Journal article. And it's using the line that Ronald Reagan used. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Quote, 50% say they are better off than they were 4 years ago in this poll, compared to 34% who say they are worse off. However, 58% say the country is worse off than 4 years ago, compared to 38% who say it's better off. Moreover, more than 60% of voters say the country is headed in the wrong direction. The number one election issue among those surveyed was the economy, and voters gave Republicans a 13-point advantage over Democrats as the better economic manager. Yet, the pollsters said voters this election cycle don't seem to be voting based on that issue alone. Keith, I'm going to throw it to you because many times you've said in our discussions here that it's the economy is stupid, and you thought that that would be a deciding factor or could be a deciding factor in this election. According to this poll, that may not be the case.
Well, Stacy, I'm not familiar with that poll, but you articulated it well, and I will look it up after this program. But everything you said certainly sounds encouraging for the president. There is certainly an advantage to incumbency, and I think he's going to play that advantage to a degree. There's also an advantage to this president has showed a great undervote. I mean, going into the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton, he was down as many as 14 points in some polls and ended up winning an electoral victory. This year's obviously different, but one of the things that are different is that he is the president of the United States and has the trappings of that. And having the trappings of that, it's how people feel about where they are and where they're headed. I'm actually shocked. I believe that if he could bring the American people's attention to where we're heading and the economic recovery, then he has a chance to carve out an electoral victory. What you've told me in this poll is there's a higher degree of confidence in the current economy than I actually thought there was. So that's very encouraging. The discouraging side is, what I'm seeing out there as far as spending is concerned. I mean, I'm a Pennsylvanian. I have my TV on from time to time. The spending by the Democrats is unbelievable. The independent expenditures and the PACs, it's probably a 5-to-1 spend against the president of the United States. So the fact that he's still in it with that type of spending, to me, tells me that he has a certain base that won't leave him. And let me tell you, before 2020, the Republicans had it all over the Democrats on independent spending and PACs. Well, they caught up, and they caught up in a hurry. But what the Republicans have done well, and a lot of people might not know this, in the battleground states since 2016, they have been quietly registering hundreds of thousands of new Republicans. In Pennsylvania, there are 75,000 new Republican registrations since 2016. So that's part of the thing that's not going into the polling, which I think could potentially bode well for the president.
All right.
Those are, that's a national poll, Stacy, and we've talked about this before. They don't tell you much. We don't know who asked these questions. We don't know what the questions actually look like. We don't know who they were asked of. But let's talk about the race and what the real issue is. There's one issue in this race, and it's the pandemic. One issue. We have 220,000 dead Americans. We do not have control of where this thing is headed. We're looking at a very harsh winter where we could have 100, 200,000 more dead Americans. We don't have a vaccine. One's coming, we know. We don't have therapy yet, but we're working on it. All of this is a result of this nation being horribly unprepared for what everybody knew was coming. That's the issue in this race. So you can talk about the economy, but the economy has to be dealt with against the backdrop of the pandemic. Everything is affected by the pandemic, and that's how people are going to vote.
The economy, Stacy, if I may, the economy, absolutely. I haven't seen the poll yet either, but the economy in this cycle cannot be looked at as an issue in a vacuum. It's attached at the hip to COVID, as the professor said. COVID is driving this. COVID and the economy, in my opinion, are one and the same, because it is the COVID that has caused the economy to be suffering. So sure, it's a very important issue in the minds of the Americans, and we don't know how the question was answered, but it is COVID that caused the economy to be where it is. So COVID is driving this. COVID is what's driving people to Joe Biden. And I just wanted to look at a couple numbers here that I wrote down so I didn't forget them. We don't know what the questions were. That is a national poll, but it's the electoral math. It is the electoral math. And let's look at that for a minute. In Pennsylvania, Mr. Biden has been up continuously. Now in Florida, Mr. Biden continues to do well and starting to show a noticeable advantage, especially in a very key demographic, senior citizens. They're moving heavy in many states, especially Florida, to Mr. Biden because of the coronavirus issue. Mr. Biden had raised $358 million last month alone. Historic. Mr. Trump is having trouble raising money right now. That speaks to the narrative. And also, we can't ignore the fact that now in Ohio, which was once a write-off for Democrats and a concession to Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden is 1 point down. And now he is campaigning heavy there when, for whatever reason, Mr. Trump has stopped advertising there and advertising in the state of Iowa. So these are signs. If I'm on the Trump team, these are very concerning indicators and markers for me. And I would not look at that poll in the Wall Street Journal as a blessing, because I think when you talk about COVID and or the economy, this cycle, you're talking about the same thing.
I always feel like there's a little bit of gaslighting when we're talking about the economy. Oh, the economy's doing well. Well, there is a large segment of society for whom that is not the case. And so to tell them, oh, the economy's doing well when they are underemployed and trying to figure out how to make ends meet is like gaslighting. That's not the reality. So to constantly tell people, oh, the economy's great when their situation doesn't reflect that, suggests to me that somebody is really out of touch with what's going on. And I'd like to see some polls asking those people, that segment of our society, about the economy. Then we'd learn a whole lot, I think.
Stacy, let me ask, I do an unscientific, clearly unscientific poll. And I did it 4 years ago. And in the back of my mind, it was correct because I didn't see any passion for Mrs. Clinton 4 years ago. In heavy Democratic areas, I didn't see it. Westmoreland County 4 years ago was still a Democratic county. And I used to drive out to St. Vincent and hardly saw a sign for her, but I saw Trump signs. And that's when I started scratching my head, what's going on? Because I didn't think there was a chance originally that Trump was going to win in Pennsylvania against Hillary Clinton. However, this year, I got to give it to the Democrats. That's starting to change a little bit. Not necessarily out in Butler County or Clarion County, where I went to see Brady's Bend a couple of weeks ago with my wife. There were 100 Trump signs to every one Biden sign. But you look at Allegheny County, and boy, the Biden signs are everywhere. I drove through formerly heavily Republican Mount Lebanon, and it is now heavily Democrat. and the signs were everywhere. And I think that reflects publicly what people are thinking. The question mark is, well, a lot of people don't put signs out. What are they thinking and where are they? And they probably don't get polled either. So I think this is still, everything's still in play. We'll have a better feel the last week of the, before the election in 2 weeks of where this is going. And you'll go again by the buys that the campaigns do. I think Pennsylvania is still heavily in play, probably will be right up through to election day. And depending on how the votes get counted and the process of it, could be a couple days later.
All right, you brought up.
Stacy, I'll remind you that.
Okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
Keith.
I just want to remind you that there's only one president on the ballot this time. So there's only one person that actually was the commander in chief and actually turned around an economy in 3 years, created 50 million plus jobs, changed the stock market, changed the economics for average working families. And that memory is pretty fresh in people's mind. So my narrative continues. If people are looking to next year and how they can get out of this situation economically and how we can stand strong again in America, the question is, will they trust Joe Biden or will they trust the president? And I think the record for the president is clear, and I think it will tip in his favor.
All right,
Voters are like creditors. They'll remember the last thing, and the last thing right now is not good.
All right, we only have a little bit of time left, and I would really like to get into this one. And so each one of you is going to get about 1 minute. Mail-in ballots, 28,000 mail-in ballots were incorrect. The ballots were incorrect and sent to 28,000 people in Allegheny County alone. The ballots have been thrown away. How long should voters have to return the ballots? How long before they have to be counted? Should signatures be verified? We've got a lot of questions remaining right now on mail-in balloting. So did we jump the gun a little too soon on mail-in balloting?
Stacy, mail-in balloting is more reliable than in-person balloting. It's served America well. It served us during wartime. It served us during peacetime. There are states that have been using it for 100 years successfully. It works. So
Joe, let
all
me
this
ask you
other
this.
stuff, it's
Why
all misdirection, really.
Well, why do you say it's more reliable than in-person voting? Because when I hear that, bells go off and says, "Oh, you mean there was something wrong at the polls? Somebody else? There was
Well,
some
Governor,
mystery going on at the
you're the
polls?"
one who didn't trust in-person voting because you introduced voter ID.
Right, that's exactly right. I didn't
So,
trust.
I
trust
think
it.
mail-in voting
which
is
we
more
defeated.
trustworthy.
I didn't trust it in certain districts in the eastern part of the state more than out here because they had over 100% participation rate in those precincts.
Well, that's what
The voter ID.
Yes, I don't-
The voter ID was it was unconstitutional. I mean, it was found to be unconstitutional. I mean, yeah, I was state chairman when that all went down, and we saw the reasons and the methodology behind it. I mean, no disrespect intended, but it just didn't pass constitutional muster. I mean, it was the strict construction of the Constitution, and the government could not bring a justifiable explanation for wanting to make such a constitutional change. The voter fraud, the allegations of fraud, just simply weren't there.
Listen, absentee ballots worked effectively the entire time I've been in politics. They took all the restrictions off them. I wish we'd have kept it there. I am 100% against unsolicited ballots being set out. But the fact is, the train's left the station. It is the reality of what we're going to deal with come election day. So all that I pray, all that I hope and pray is that we prepare the American people, as I said at least a dozen times on this program, that there could be a better than even chance that we're not going to have a decision on election night or 2 days later. And it might take as long as a week in some states to have an outcome. And if we don't properly prepare the American people that this year is different from any other year you've ever voted, then we are leaving ourselves open for potential civil unrest. And nobody's a winner if that happens. We have to prepare the American people that it's going to take time if this race is as close as I think it might be.
Amanda,
Voting is
last word.
supposed to be a fundamental right, which means that it's important to our participation in our society as well as our economy. And if that's really the case, if that's really the truth, then we need to make voting as accessible and as easy as possible for every eligible voter. And if that means mail, then it means mail. And the issues and concerns that people are talking about with the mail, yes, there have been some concerns, perhaps with mail delivery personnel throwing away mail, things like that. But we have to find a way, if it's not mail, we have to find a way to make it as accessible and as easy as possible for every eligible voter. And that's the conversation we need to be having then if we're going to be knocking the mail. And our mail
There will
carriers.
never be a perfect election. There
No.
never has been a perfect election. All we can provide is the best election we can produce. And human frailty and human folly will lead to all these little errors and mistakes that someone could point to and say, oh, well, gee, look at that. You know, this isn't working. The truth is it works. It works. And we're going to have an election in a couple of weeks, and we're going to choose a president, and we will have a peaceful transition of power, or the streets will be flooded with people. We'll have a national strike.
All
I
right.
suspect things are going to go well, and we're going to have that peaceful transition.
All right, we are out of time. I will say this, Joe, Governor Corbett might say when he was elected governor, that was a perfect election, but we'll.
But the second one wasn't.
The second one wasn't, right? Exactly. All right, thanks so much for joining us on Around the Table, and we'll see
See
you
y'all.
next week.
Have a great week.
See ya.
Bye-bye.